stories to us at eeriecast.com. Send your scariest workplace stories to us at eeriecast.com/submit. And rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks. How do you protect a home when the intruder has been dead for a very long time? I can relate. I think I've been dead inside for 30 years now. Taking each day one espresso and fiber gummy at a time. What a combo. Hey, good to see you back, dear friends. I'm heading on my break right now. And boy, do I have some scary work stories for you today. Stories I've heard recently about a bizarre creature dragging an officer from his car, a bodyguard coming face to face with the unexplained, and more. Grab yourself a chocolate croissant, maybe even a nerd's rope. I freaking love those. These are Tales from the Break Room. Alluring Silence from Chihiro. It's been a long time since this happened, at least a few years, but I can finally say what happened without feeling absolutely and utterly insane. I've told this tale to friends, family, and even my therapist, and they say the same things. It's trauma, PTSD, maybe even a vivid hallucination. But I know it happened, and I know it was real and viable, right there in front of me. Breathing, staring me down, tearing me from that twisted clump of metal. I'm a sheriff for a local police force in Iowa, out in the middle of nowhere, USA. All I usually patrol are teenagers who've had a little too much to drink and went on a joyride, or the local drunk stumbling around the streets yelling incoherent gibberish at passersby. It's not a glorious job, but it keeps me fed and my family off the streets. Some days I'm grateful for the mundane. Others I wish something was going on, but most days I just enjoy the safety of normality. I was on my 4th cup of coffee for the night, tapping my pen on my notepad that I'd filled with hundreds of small doodles of various characters. This in and of itself was part of my normal night. Drink coffee, go on a few tours around town, come back and look over case files I'd seen dozens of times, and finally go home. Speaking of home, I looked at the clock, seeing I had another 6 hours on shift. So I decided to go for a tour around town, down all the dark alleys and the back roads, as I usually did at least twice a night. I found myself falling back into routine. I grabbed my keys, jumped into the car, and started the slow crawl down the back roads, which were nothing more than dirt and broken gravel. Our town never really cared to maintain these roads, as mostly rednecks, hunters, and very few wanderers tended to use them. So they laid to rot, forgotten amongst the woods that encircled our small town. That night was clear, which was a relief after the week of fog thick enough to see only a few inches in front of your face. I slowly maneuvered my way through the dirt roads, going slow because of how often deer are hit through here. Deer really aren't that smart. Seems like they stand there and play chicken with you. Anyway, I'd made it 10 miles out of town, and I was just about to turn back, when to my dismay, I found myself turned around. This didn't happen often. I was careful to stick to routes I knew, so I was quite confused as I turned my car to see an unfamiliar road ahead of me. I would have had to come from that way, so how could it possibly be different? I tried to radio dispatch. Holly was usually the one on the other line this late at night, and her low melodic voice would have done wonders for my nerves, but it seemed that my radio was not working. There was no noise when I clicked the button, nor any lights on the device. Needless to say, I was a little more than panicked at that moment, but I decided to try my luck and head down this road. That was a mistake. I found myself in the midst of a fog bank about a mile in. I don't know how that was possible. The weather had just been so clear, and the night air had been quite warm. But here I was, surrounded by dense fog that seemed to swallow everything it curled around. I was utterly shocked that such a thing had seemingly come from nowhere, and nothing looked familiar. But the only thing I could do was continue on and pray. I was almost scared to keep going, but a loud noise from behind me had me going as fast as I dared. It was very loud. It rang through my ears, sending chills down to the bone, and made me instantly nauseous. I was scared, far from contact, alone, and worst of all, lost. I glanced in the mirror, and I saw a dark shape chasing after my squad car. The noise was a sort of horrible scream or yell, and it was getting closer until it was right ahead of me. I couldn't stop. My car slammed into it, which didn't even seem to faze whatever it was. I was out for a few moments, having hit my head pretty hard when the airbags went off, so I was dazed and disoriented. I woke when I heard the metal door being pried open. I'd hoped it was help after I slammed into what I thought was a deer. Instead of hands, though, long claws wound their way around me, yanking me from the car and tossing me onto the dirt road. The creature was tall, roughly 9 feet, completely covered in matted dark fur with a color so dark I couldn't tell what it was, but I could see eyes piercing into my soul. I was terrified. I didn't know what I was looking at. I was confused and dizzy. I could tell my arm was fractured, and that throw didn't do me any favors. Not to mention I'd been negligent that night. Expecting a normal patrol, I was not armed. I got up as quickly as I could and sprinted for my life. I didn't know where I was or even how far from town I was, but I could hear that thing lumbering after me. Sounds like spitting and hissing and tearing up the dirt road. It was awful. The creature gave off a scent like corpses left in the sun for days, with a hint of roadkill baked on the asphalt. And the sound it made was unnerving, a mix of a human trying to sound like a deer or an elk. It was somehow a scream and the growl of a bear at the same time, too. And God, those eyes were dead and soulless and hungry. I ran and ran, no air left in my lungs. I was wheezing. As shameful as it is, I was crying from the fear and the pain. Before long, I stopped hearing the beast behind me, but at the same time, the world around me grew darker, fainter, and I found myself lying on the road to the entrance of town. One moment I was alone. The next, paramedics loomed over me. When I came to, I was informed I'd wrapped my car around a light pole, and I'd managed to drag myself out of the car before it ignited. I tried desperately to tell someone, anyone, what happened, but it was concluded to be hysteria or delusions from the concussion. I was put on a month-long leave and handed over to a therapist who would help me put the vivid delusions behind me. I faked getting better so I could go back on patrol. But I will repeat it here. I knew it was real. I knew what I saw, what I ran from. But the boss could see something in me was frightened. I got a nice comfy desk job before I was eventually let go months later, with a very nice severance at the least. What I experienced will haunt me for the rest of my days, but I had to tell someone, anyone who would understand. Stay away from the backwoods of Iowa. Room 127. From Rudy B. I worked as a CNA for 5 years at a nursing home in my small town. I, along with several coworkers, had multiple paranormal experiences here. But the one that I can honestly say none of us could ever explain happened my last year working there. It was August of 2021. COVID had settled down for the most part, and most of our routines were going back to normal. I got put on the rehab hall, which was a hall they placed residents who either had surgery, for example a knee replacement, and came to recover before returning home, or they were residents who were there to pass away. This particular day, I got a couple in a room. This wasn't uncommon, but I had never personally been over a married couple that shared a room. The husband had dementia and was going to be staying with us, and his wife had a knee replacement and needed to be with us until she was well enough to be discharged. They were a sweet couple and loved each other very much. Even with his dementia, her husband knew that his wife was supposed to be by his side. The couple, whom we will call the Smiths, were very pleasant to be around and to take care of. Pretty soon, the wife had told all the staff to call her Granny. I grew close to them as I had lost my grandmother in 2017, and having someone who couldn't really fill that role but be there for me was nice. One night I was checking on all the residents during one of my walkthroughs. It was midnight, and I heard a soft crying. It was coming from 127, the Smiths' room. I knocked softly on their door, which was cracked open a little. I called out to Mrs. Smith, who was usually up crocheting or reading late into the night. But when I got into the room, both of them were sound asleep. All I heard at the moment was the sound of the CPAP machine, which Mrs. Smith had to wear while sleeping. Having worked overtime this past week, I thought, hey, I'm hearing things and just need some rest. I walked out, cracking their door again, and heading to the nurse to let her know I was going to take my break. Well, I was on my break, watching YouTube videos on my phone, when I heard it again. That soft cry. Now, sometimes there would be empty rooms in the hall, and being respectful to the housekeepers, I wouldn't touch anything in the room that had been cleaned. I would just sit in the recliner for my 15 minutes before getting back to work. Now, the empty room I was currently sitting in happened to be right across the hall from, you guessed it, room 127. I turned off my phone and listened for a good minute, and I heard the crying. Slowly, I stood up, walking to the door of the Smith's room, which was still cracked from before. It was definitely coming from inside. Before I could even reach up to knock on the door slowly creaked open, making a sound like you would hear in a horror film, until it was wide open and I was staring into the dark. I walked in again, saying, "Hello, Mrs. Smith? Mr. Smith? Are you two okay?" No answer. Same as before. They were both fast asleep. Starting to get a little freaked out, I reported back to the nurse and told her what I'd heard and what was going on. She looked at me with big eyes, telling me that about 6 years ago, there had been a couple in that room before. She was a CNA at the time, going through nursing school, and was in charge of taking care of the couple occupying that room. In her night shifts, she would hear crying, and come to find out it was the wife of the man sent to the nursing home with stage 4 cancer. He was slowly but surely passing away, and she was a resident as well, who just wanted to be with her husband. She explained the husband passed away, and the wife about 2 months after passed away as well. The wife would cry every night to herself until she was finally able to reunite with her husband. She said, "That's the first time we've had anyone hear her or mention it since then. It's been a while. I almost forgot about it, honestly." Okay, so why is she here now? Mr. Smith seemed fine today, and Mrs. Smith was smiling and crocheting potholders before bedtime earlier. "Everyone seems fine," I replied. The nurse shrugged her shoulders, and we both brushed it off, not hearing anything else the rest of the night. The following night I came to work. I was greeted by a day shift employee who told me he kept hearing the same sounds as well, and was now himself freaking out. He was staying over that night until 10 p.m. to make up some time off, so we worked the hall together. Then at about 9:30 p.m., we both heard it at the same time. The soft crying. He went into the room first, and we checked on the patients. This time, Mrs. Smith was still awake, reading. She smiled as we walked in. She greeted us and gave us each a potholder she'd made, and we talked to her for a good 10 minutes before my coworker realized it was time for him to go home. So he went to finish his charting while I said goodnight to the residents and checked on the remainder of the hall. I came to the nurse's station just in time to see my coworker grabbing his bag, about to go clock out, when we heard a big crash. He threw his bag down and both of us took off down the hall. Lying on the floor next to his bed was Mr. Smith, and poor Mrs. Smith was trying to get him back up, just crying. Mr. Smith was trying to get out of bed and kept saying, "That lady was standing over my bed crying again." Our eyes locked and we helped him back into bed, calling the nurse to check him out and calming Mrs. Smith down. That very night, Mr. Smith passed away in his sleep, and Mrs. Smith would follow not even 2 months after. Until my last day at the nursing home, I would hear those cries, and sometimes it would get me to the point of crying myself. Nobody knows why the crying lady is still in room 127, but on my last day working there, before accepting my new job, I sat in that room and told whoever was in there that I was sorry. I felt as if I had to say goodbye to them before I could move on myself. They turned that hall into a therapy hall, I guess you could call it, after I left. And part of me wonders if the lady is still there, or if she's now moved on after I told her goodbye. I do hope I gave her the closure she needed.
Winter's better when you're prepared. Experian, your BFF, big financial friend, could cancel subscriptions you don't use and help lower your bills. Get started with the Experian app today. Your big financial friends, helping you stay cozy and in control. Results will vary. Not all bills or subscriptions eligible. Savings not guaranteed. $631 a year. Average savings with 1+ negotiations and 1+ cancel.
Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets. Shadows in the Snow. From Forrest Fox. It was a cold winter night. I had just finished a double shift at the nursing home and was utterly exhausted. I walked out to my car, clicking the key fob, only to have no response from my vehicle. I swore under my breath, drawing my coat around me for warmth. It was at this time I really regretted buying an electric car. I stood there shivering before pulling out my cell phone, calling for assistance from my dearest friend, Seth. He was awake, obviously, as he was an insomniac, and while I usually nag him to sleep, I was grateful he was up at the time. "Be there in 20. Let me grab my jacket and keys," he told me. I was so thankful, trembling from the cold. I walked back to the building and to the reception area, where I watched snow beginning to fall. The temperatures were sure to drop below the 34 degrees they already were. I could hear the wind howling by the window, and it made me feel even colder. I saw headlights, so I began to gather my purse and go back outside. It was snowing pretty heavily by then. "Seth!" I stopped in the middle of the parking lot, seeing a blue Civic. This wasn't Seth. It was my coworker who hastily ran into the building, almost late. I was heading back to the warmth when a loud bang filled my ears. The power went out, causing the building to go on lockdown. I started to panic. That meant I couldn't get back inside. I quickly called Seth again, and he quickly picked up. "Kathy, there's been a wreck. I'm fine, but my car is totaled. I can't come get you. The cops are here. I've got to go. I'm sorry." With that, my way home officially died. I stared at the snow swirling around me, cursing the day I got that electric push-to-start car. It didn't even have any keyholes that I could just jam the key into, and I knew almost nothing about cars to fix it. With the building lock, I couldn't just run in for help. I fought back the incredibly strong urge to panic. I was cold, hungry, and utterly miserable. I picked up the phone, dialing coworkers, friends, and family, but they were either hours away or didn't answer. I was so upset that I started staring at the road, calculating how long it could take me to walk home. The tow trucks wouldn't come through the area with how bad it usually got when it snowed here. I was rather disappointed with my circumstances, but I had snagged my jacket and wrapped it tightly around me, slowly becoming less cold. But I noticed some odd movements in between the haze of snow. It was sudden, but I captured small glimpses of tiny darting black things in several colors. At first, I thought perhaps it was the snow messing with my eyes, or maybe I'd missed my anxiety medication. My eyes were wide, taking in the slightest movement and seeing so many small creatures in the snow. I was getting scared. My heart raced, blood chilling in the cold night air. I ran to the glass doors of the nursing home, banging on them frantically, sobbing to be let back in. I was horrified, not sure what to do. If I had to protect myself, what would I even reach for? I didn't even know what these things were. Was I hallucinating, having a sort of delusion from the cold? I didn't get an answer at the door. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw those creatures starting to swarm near me, and I shrieked, darting towards the road. I was nearly plowed into by a red Ford, which slammed on its brakes mere inches from me. The driver was a large, burly man with blue eyes and gray hair. "What are you, crazy?" Then he looked behind me. I think he saw them too. So maybe I wasn't crazy. "Get in!" he called. I didn't even second guess this man who I didn't know. I jumped into his truck, slammed the door behind me, and yelled, "Go!" He went speeding down the road as quickly as he dared. "Look, little lady, I don't know who you are or what those were, but we can't be out here. Power's out all around town right now." I pulled up my phone, seeing no bars. God, can you just take me home, please? I live on Maple and Cypress. He seemed surprised. "What's your name?" "Kathy. Please take me home. That's all I want to do, to get away from whatever that was. To go home, go to bed." "Pleased to meet you, Kathy. I'll happily take you home. You actually live near my son, Seth." I was surprised. Seth? He's my best friend. He was actually just in a wreck. But on the phone, he said he was fine. The police will take him home. He nodded. He called me and let me know what was going on. I felt the fatigue creeping up, since I knew I was finally safe and warm. I never knew he had such a cool dad. Thank you for rescuing me. What's your name? Sam. He gave me a smile before gradually slowing to a stop right before my house. I think I remember Seth saying his best friend lived here. Was that right? I nodded, quite happy to be home. Yes, thank you so much. Feel free to stop by sometime. I'll get you some food. By the way, any idea what those things were? Sam frowned, the wrinkles around his forehead deepening. Not really sure, nor do I want to know. Just count your blessings that you're safely home. I gotta go check on Seth, but we'll visit another day. Good night, Kathy. I fumbled with my house key, letting myself in and locking it firmly behind me. The electricity was out, much like Sam had said, so I used my phone's flashlight until I found the candles, which I then lit all around the living room and kitchen. My cat greeted me with a long meow, and I pet her for a while before getting her some food. I was exhausted, so I blew out most of the candles and lay on the couch once I was satisfied the house wasn't going to catch fire. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep. I was out for several hours. Despite feeling so exhausted, it felt like I only slept moments. I woke up to my cat, Luna, hissing at the stairs. I woke up in a panic, wondering what my sweet-mannered cat was hissing at. I didn't see anything at first. I went to use my phone's flashlight, only to see the phone was dead. I mean, I couldn't really charge it with the power out. Nothing I could have done. I then began to hear scurrying around the shadows. This startled and scared me. There was a smell coming from the sound, too. It was horrible. I was nauseous the second I caught a whiff of it. I couldn't see what was making the noise and the smell, but I could see the outline. It was darker than the night itself. I screamed, and Luna ran for the downstairs. I then saw something dart from the shadows running after her. All the while I shrieked in horror, racing to follow the two. But a smell stopped me. A coppery smell, thick and awful. I knew what this was, and I hoped I was wrong. When I got to Luna, I found her twitching on the floor with a very dark creature chomping on her body. Immediately, I was wrecked. I began to bawl. Luna had been with me for 10 years, since I started my nursing career in that retirement home. My companion, my comfort, was now destroyed by whatever this weird animal was. I screamed and began to throw things at it, anything within range. Christmas ornaments, Halloween decorations, knives, spoons, fancy holiday serving plates, and so many other things, but I didn't care to notice. I was furious, distraught. I wanted nothing more than to let it feel how I felt. I wanted to hurt it for taking away my friend, for following me from my work, for just existing, a terrible, dreadful existence. The creature writhed underneath shattered glass, and it was clearly in distress, as it bent and writhed under the shards. There were bits of plastic and metal too. It gave a shriek before rushing past me onto the stairs, feverishly running away into the shadows. I couldn't let it escape, not after what it did, so I chased it until I saw it run through my door. I grabbed the door and flung it open, chasing the shadowy thing down the street, which was empty and dark, save for a few inches of snow. The world was quiet. All I could hear then was my own panting and the occasional wail from that creature. I raced after the noise down the street until I reached an all-too-familiar park. It was where I went during the weekends when I had no work and the days were warmer. Being in such a familiar place gave me a misguided sense of smugness, thinking of how well I knew this park and where I could lure the blood-covered shadow beast. I didn't know what I would do once I got a hold of it, but I knew it had to pay for what it did to Luna. I heard it crossing a few branches, making noises as it went, so I sped up, grabbing at the thing, noticing how my fingers sank into its skin. It resumed shrieking like I'd thrown it into a fire. I was filled with nothing but hatred as I began to spit on it, crying all the while as my fingers grasped and squeezed at the writhing shadow. The creature stood still, collapsing to the ground, seemingly dead. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel peace for avenging my furry friend. I was empty and cold. I stared down at the shadow once again, expecting to see it writhe, but I screamed instead. I was looking at Sam. My hands were wrapped around his neck, and he wasn't breathing. I screamed and cried, wondering what to do. I then rummaged through his pockets, taking out a cell phone and calling Seth. In tears, I begged him to come where I was, and I apologized over and over, and I admitted to what I did to his dad. Seth was quiet for a moment.
Kathy, what's going on? Are you okay? My dad's been dead for 4 years. Are you on something? You can tell me. Have you taken your meds?
I swallowed. I waved the phone around, shouting at it. How would I have this phone then? How would I be looking at his corpse? How would I have made it home in his red Ford? Seth replied.
Kathy, my dad had a 1966 Riviera. He hated pickup trucks. some help?
No, I'm sorry. I have to go. I hung up, dropping the phone and daring to look back at the corpse. It was nothing but shadow again. I couldn't take this. I ran back home, putting Luna in a box, and I buried her near the flower bed. I couldn't stand to look at her or think about what I did to Sam. I sobbed myself to sleep, and I woke up. There was Luna, purring like she usually did, on my lap. I hugged her, sobbing, wondering if it was some nightmare, until I looked outside. The grave I thought I'd dug was now dug up. I felt so sick, but so happy. Luna smelled fine. She smelled alive. She looked and felt alive. There she was, warm and walking and talking like my Luna, as much as cats could talk to a person. Maybe I'd lost my mind that night. Maybe the snow had sent me over the edge. Maybe hypothermia or something caused me to hallucinate. Maybe I got delirious. I don't know anymore. But I've long since moved from that town, leaving Luna with Seth. I just didn't trust her around me anymore. But I did trust him. I never again saw the shadows after that. But I can definitely say I'd rather work somewhere warmer. My uncle's time as a police officer. From Cricket Girl 20. My uncle James was a police officer for over 12 years, and he had many terrifying and horrific experiences. 3 of them stand out. I will write them from his point of view. It was the early 2000s. I don't remember which year, but I do remember it was around 10 p.m. I was responding to a call of a child screaming. When I got to the address, an elderly woman was outside. She said to me, "It's been quiet for a while now, but that poor child, I think his mother neglects him. But every time I call Child Protective Services, they never find any evidence." When I went in, what I saw made my stomach turn. There on the ground was a 3-year-old with burns on his body. His mother was passed out drunk on the couch, and her boyfriend was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing and telling his friend that he had just burned his girlfriend's son. I told him to put his phone down. He said, "When I'm done." I forcefully took the phone from his hand and slammed him to the ground, handcuffing him. I then went back to the boy. Poor thing was barely hanging on. Backup arrived, along with an ambulance. I ran out to the ambulance with the boy in my arms. At one point, he looked up at me as I sat with him in the ambulance. I then told the driver to go as fast as he could. As we were around the block from the hospital, the young boy looked at me again and smiled. But then, he went still. He stopped breathing. I cried as the ambulance arrived and the paramedics tried to revive him. When I got back to the station, I saw that the boyfriend was getting booked. I grabbed him by the neck and called him a child killer. Some other officers had to pull me off of him. Later on, the man tried to explain the situation, that the boy was crying and he guessed he was hungry and his mom was sleeping. The boyfriend told him to shut up repeatedly, but the boy would not. So he picked him up, rolled him over the built-in floor heater about 5 times, then tossed him on the floor. The boyfriend was charged with murder, and thankfully, he didn't last long in prison. The mother was charged with child neglect. To this day, I still think about that boy. This next story is about James's first experience with a ghost as an adult. A fellow officer and I responded to a call at an old warehouse. Someone called and said that someone was in the warehouse. We got there with a canine officer and went inside. The air was cold and dense, even though it was so warm out. We announced ourselves, then began to look through the warehouse. Suddenly, the canine jerked its head toward a corner and began to bark like mad. We shined the flashlights in that direction, finding a young girl in a bloody white dress. She was staring down at the ground, whispering something. When she looked up at us, she screamed bloody murder. We both basically flew out of the building with the dog outrunning us. We got in the car and caught our breaths. Then we looked at each other. My partner said, "Was that? No, it couldn't be. Did we see a ghost?" I couldn't come up with another explanation. We decided to just leave the warehouse. My partner quit a few days later. The other officers were obviously freaked out when I told them. I tried looking up any information about that girl, maybe some disappearances, or, if it was a ghost, perhaps a murder or tragedy. Truth be told, I had some nightmares for a few nights afterwards. Heck, I couldn't even watch a scary movie for a while. That girl looked like she was from the 80s, but I'll never forget the words she whispered. "I told him no. I told him to stop. I said I was sorry." The canine changed after that too. That dog became aggressive towards other dogs. But as soon as the dog was retired, he went back to his old ways. I haven't seen a supposed ghost since then, but that was one of the scariest paranormal encounters I've ever had. Trust me, whenever I hear an unexplained sound, I immediately get goosebumps. This last story is not scary per se, but was heart-pounding for James. I was patrolling the streets when I saw a man that we had been looking for in a grocery store parking lot. I pulled in and confronted him. I saw he had a weapon in his pants, and he began to reach for it. I pulled my sidearm and told him to get down on the ground, but he would not comply. He started to look around and spotted two elderly women walking into the store, and he said, "If you don't let me go, I'll kill those two women." I had a tough choice to make. Kill this man, let him get away, or continue this stand down, risking those women's lives. I lowered my weapon, and the man ran away. I told my boss, and he gave me the benefit of the doubt, but I was suspended for a week with pay. Word got to the other officers, and a lot of them began to dislike me. But I don't think I would have changed what I did. As the years progressed, the other officers became dirty, buying from dealers or using the drugs they got from drug busts. They tried getting James to go dirty too, but he wouldn't do it. After James and his wife got in a car wreck, James was fired, but he says he doesn't miss being a cop. He's enjoying his life these days. He and his wife live on the outskirts of a big city with their dog, and they enjoy going to the lake for days on end. James did apply for a job as a security guard at a local jail, but they wanted him to use a gun, so he declined. Dignitary protection from Matto Man. I've worked a number of jobs over the years, not because I haven't known what I wanted to do with my life, rather because I want to do many things with my life. Believe it or not, my time in finance had its own scary moments more than once. It's a given that my career in law enforcement had its fair share of trauma and experiences, few of which I've written about. One of the cool things of my career as a state trooper was being trained to do dignitary protection, namely for the governor, but also senators, congressmen, even dignitaries of other countries. It's a thankless job, requiring 80 to 100 hours per week, because as the Secret Service for the dignitary you're assigned, you'll also live in the dignitaries' homes and mansions, driving them to their meetings, even leaving the country with them. And yes, we do fly in planes with our pistols, taking them to other countries as well. You're also responsible for the first family. You end up taking the governor's wife to yoga, or the daughter to prom with her date, or even performing recon of event centers prior to the arrival of the governor, or being responsible for the exfil route and various safe houses across the state. Sometimes you drive the armored SUV well above the speed limit to avoid being bogged down in traffic. Other times you carry a go bag of goodies, which may contain an MP7 and extra magazines. Needless to say, it is demanding, and you typically are only allowed to be in the position for 2 to 3 years due to the stress and the inability to see your own family. However, you typically don't apply for this job. Rather, you're hand-selected by the governor himself at the suggestion of the brass of the state police. It's basically impossible to say no. The training is intense, but comes in handy often in keeping my own family safe. And upon retirement, maintaining a business of private security for public figures, rich people, basketball players, or whomever feels the need to pay for such protection. In the instance of this story, I was not on the governor's protection unit. I started with protection of state prosecutors, working high-profile cases, which were gaining media attention. This particular individual was receiving death threats due to a controversial case. It's not my job to pay attention to headlines or know why they're in the spotlight, and it's certainly not my job to have an opinion about the individual. My job is to protect them, regardless of how I feel or how I align on these particular issues. In this case, I was tasked to protect a prosecutor who had actually taught one of the many law classes while in the academy. A prosecutor who had many crushes, as she was quite young, attractive, and very pleasant to be around. For this reason alone, protection was necessary, even if she wasn't involved in controversy. Her husband, who made a killer living in a career of his own, was not home very often, further leaving the dignitary more vulnerable. They had no children, so that actually made things a bit easier. Be there when she's home alone, and if her husband is home, I am to be on call to respond in case of emergency, and during business hours I am to drive her to meetings and the courthouse in a state-issued SUV with my trusted go bag. Simple enough, right? Well, this experience was nothing like I've experienced before in my career. Up until this moment, the only thing I've ever been afraid of is people. It was a normal fall day, October, I believe. I left my personal vehicle at home and took the state vehicle to my destination, which was the dignitary's mansion in the canyon. The weather was clear that day, the type of weather where you can cruise with the windows down and not have any discomfort. This was my favorite time of year. I made my drive through the city, all the way to the house on the hills type neighborhoods. I drove even further past those homes, up into the canyon. The canyon was beautiful. The trees were already changing colors. As I drove up the canyon, the air turned more crisp as the trees changed to pines and firs, making it clear I'd gained significant elevation. It was an enjoyable drive, winding around the canyon hairpin turns, enjoying every minute of the drive. I eventually arrived at the residence. It was an imposing mansion overlooking much of the canyon. The city sat a couple of miles below. It was truly a sight to behold. I could tell the home was built years ago, still very nice and luxurious, but definitely not new. The type of home you'd expect a murder mystery-themed play or movie to be centered in. I pulled up to a wrought iron gate, scanned my badge, and it opened automatically. I drove up a winding driveway to a 4-car garage and a guest house surrounded by a courtyard, which was tastefully decorated with a pretend cemetery for Halloween. I was greeted at my vehicle by the other dignitary agent, who was going to be briefing me for my first day. It was clear he was anxious to leave and enjoy his coming days off, so he was talking and walking quickly. He gave me the lay of the land. The property was expansive and entirely off the grid and self-reliant. It had its own solar power, generating its own electricity efficiently enough that it wasn't wired to any municipal electric company. The house had several very large propane tanks, which were filled by a private company, also ensuring the property was not connected to the city's grid. All the water came from its own well and a natural spring. All of it was quite impressive. Toward the end of the property, elevation starts to gain as it lies directly against the mountain. The entire property was protected with a 9-foot fence, motion sensor lights, infrared lights, motion detectors, and even a safe room. You know, things people with money seem to have. I saw evidence of wildlife on the expansive property, and I swear I saw some mountain lion tracks too. The agent took me inside, showing me around the mansion. He took me to the panic room, showing me the CCTV screens, how the motion sensors worked, things like that. He then took me to the gym, indoor pool, and basketball court. Yeah, I meant it when I said it was expansive. Honestly surprising these people would even leave their home. The place was full of corridors, libraries, and drafty doors and windows. Not all of the house had been updated. He also informed me of the dignitary's preference for contact, more or less saying, "She's very friendly, but she's not your friend, so never start conversations unless she initiates, and never crowd her in a room. You gotta find a happy medium of watching over her and the property without her seeing you too much, and absolutely never be at the pool when she's there. She will fire you if she thinks you're eyeballing her in her bathing suit." Pretty understandable stuff. More or less, she was not thrilled with needing security, and was looking forward to the day when we were not needed any longer. I took mental notes, and I tried to retain all of it, but before long he was rushing out the door, ready to have his own life for a couple of days. It was beginning to get dark, so I made some rounds around the property, making sure the exterior doors were locked, the lights were on, and looking for anything unusual. I ran into the dignitary in the courtyard on the phone. I could tell she would have preferred to ignore me, but being friendly, she waved and smiled. I continued on my way, trying to look busy. I walked to the guest house. The guest house may even be older than the mansion itself. If I had to guess, it was probably here as the original home on the property. It was all imposing red brick, probably about 1,200 square feet in total. It was maintained well despite its age. It was clear the interior was less of a priority and was mostly made up for security purposes. It was nice, but not overly luxurious. I entered the front door, which was a large and heavy double door made of solid wood, which let out this ominous squeal when I slowly opened it. The house smelled like old wood and ancient history. You know the smell. The outlets looked like what I imagine the first ever electrical outlets ever designed probably looked like, and I barely trusted them enough to plug my phone in. I found the kitchen, which was well stocked and somewhat updated. The bedroom looked like it contained original furniture from whatever pioneer built the home, but the second bedroom was much different. It contained CCTV camera monitors and motion sensor alarms, access to a panel to control the gate and exterior doors of the home. It was clear they dropped some cash to somehow make that portion of the building capable of withstanding that load, as it had a lot of equipment. The only furniture piece that seemed new was a TV installed in the bedroom and a speaker system that was wired through the whole home, clearly for alarms. It felt pretty vulnerable, being far away from the dignitary. Surely she had rooms I could stay in the actual mansion, probably actually luxurious rooms. But she put us out here in the guest house for a reason. She wanted to feel normal in life. I ate a quick dinner and hit the sack, slightly anxious of danger like I usually was at work. I was startled awake. I forgot where I was at the moment. I grabbed at my MP7, which I'd stowed in my go bag, before I realized I was awakened by a motion alarm in the courtyard outside. I checked the cameras, and I saw no movement. I wondered if false alarms were common. It was only about 2 a.m. I sat at the cameras for a few moments to see if there was more movement, but there was nothing. I went back to sleep. I woke up early to make more rounds around the property, and I found nothing of concern. I saw the dignitary outside on the brisk morning, wearing a skimpy workout outfit. I certainly was not going to approach her. She, however, was friendly and approached me instead, asking how I slept and if I needed anything. She even offered me breakfast, which I refused. I informed her I'd found nothing of concern, and that I'd be here for a few days before my shift ended. I told her my name and asked her to reach out if she had any concerns herself. She was eager to ask how I felt about the guest house, to which I lied and said it was swanky. In reality, I missed my own bed and not ancient home. The conversation was over and I went on with my business. Later that day, I escorted her to the courthouse with no worrisome events to report. That evening, I did my routine and hit the sack again, awakened once more by an alarm at 2 a.m. to movement outside in the courtyard. There was nothing on the cameras. As I sat at the monitors for a moment, another motion alarm went off, this time for the small porch of the guest home. My blood was chilled as I heard a small knock at the front door. The cameras still showed nothing, simply the wind whipping up debris. That had to be what was causing the motion sensor to trigger. Maybe even the knock on the door. A plausible explanation. I sat for a few moments before going to bed, this time making sure the MP7 was ready to do its job, just in case. The next day came and went with no incident that I can recall. However, the dignitary did follow up to ask how my night was. I reported, "Nothing unusual whatsoever, ma'am." She was eager to ask once again. The conversation ended, and I thought nothing more of it. The third night here is when things changed forever for me. Like routine, 2 a.m., the alarm goes off. But there's nothing on the cameras. The alarm goes off on the porch as well, and a knock on the door is heard once again. I'm having a much harder time rationalizing it this time. I decided I had to go outside to investigate, MP7 in hand, to fend off an intruder or threat to the dignitary. I exited the guest home and I entered the courtyard. I walked through the pretend cemetery and approached my vehicle, deciding to walk around the vehicle and down the driveway to check the front gate. When I got there, the gate was sealed shut. There was no evidence of recent entry. I walked back to my car, unlocking the door, and sat in it with the lights off to see if any sort of movement happened while I was hidden inside. I did fall asleep briefly. I woke up after a few minutes, feeling dumb that I, a professional, could sleep through a potential threat. I opened my car door and got out. With the door open, I decided to stretch, trying to wake myself up again. I then felt something. A presence, like there was someone right behind me. I felt a chill in the air, chillier than a normal October evening. I turned. There, standing directly behind me, was a small girl with red hair and an old-timey dress. She had a visible injury to her face and head. I stumbled back, flight instinct taking over. I fell on my back like a coward. Just as quickly as she came, she was gone. I lay there, gun in hand, wondering if I'd just reached the brink of sanity, or if that was indeed real. I came to my senses eventually, and promptly ran back to my now much creepier guest home, where I turned on all the lights and refused to sleep. By morning, I realized I needed to make the rounds again, make my presence known to the dignitary. She was once more outside in her workout attire, definitely not covering enough to keep her warm, considering there was frost on the ground. She eagerly approached me, asking how my night was. She then noticed the bags under my eyes. Then she asked me something that bothered me deeply. "You finally saw her, didn't you?" I nodded yes, expecting her to fire me for being insane or something. She said, "Follow me," and took me inside to the library in the home, a musty old room with dark wood, black walls, and old furniture. She found an old book dated from the late 1800s. She explained that this was a government record of the ownership of this plot of land. She continued on, saying it was settled by Irish immigrants, who eventually became quite wealthy. Their daughter died on the property due to some farming accident. She said that the whole darned family keeps us up some nights, and left it at that. She did admit she loved the home nevertheless, even loved the ghosts. She said the activity increased when they renovated the mansion, adding the pool and other amenities. She explained that all of the security forces saw her, and that I should not be alarmed. But, honestly, this did not help me feel any better. I texted the prior agent, the one who had onboarded me, and told him about the experience. He replied, saying,
You'd have to be crazy to think I'd lead with a story like that. You would never have let me leave the darned property if I did.
I mean, yeah, he had a point. I proceeded to work my assignments there until I was eventually transferred to an investigation unit, which held its own set of traumas for me that I'll have to tell you about another time. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated, I'm so excited because the first book by Darkness Prevails and Carmen Carrion is available for pre-order right now. It's the Freaky Folklore Compendium, filled with the history and lore of the most terrifying folklore monsters across the globe, alongside some cool but creepy illustrations. Releases July 16th. Pre-order now at eriecast.com/freak or on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and your favorite bookstore. When tornadoes aren't wreaking havoc in Oklahoma, it's the pale, crawling humanoids that drag folks away into the woods that are doing much of the damage, apparently. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. Follow me on Twitter at DarkPrevails because I keep tweeting about Elden Ring things. Today's episode features an assortment of stories about the Oklahoma Crawler, disturbing apparitions, and terrifying ghostly mysteries. Enjoy. Send me your scary stories at darkstories.org, and check out my other show, Tales from the Break Room, for some scary work stories on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Now, let's begin. The Hat Man, from Nordic Pagan. I've thought a long time about sending this in, as I still don't believe it myself, but here we go. My sister used to live in a very ghost-filled house. Things would pull at your clothes or knock things over frequently. My nephew would constantly play and talk to a little boy that only he could see. My other nephew had an encounter with what he called the witch. At the time, he was on leave from the army and had gone out the back for a smoke. As he was coming back in, he said through the window there was a face of an old lady who didn't look friendly at all. My brother-in-law had an encounter with a little boy. He was having a nap on the sofa, and as he got up to go to bed, he looked over, and sitting on the radiator was a little boy wearing what he said looked like 1900s clothing. After doing some digging on the home, I found out that back in the early 1900s, the house belonged to coal miners, and at the back of her house, there used to be a mine. Now, this is my encounter, which is the scariest thing I've ever come across. This happened a long time ago now. I've always searched for answers to what it meant, but people give me various opinions on it. Back in 2005, my mom was undergoing treatment for cancer and was living with my sister and her family. On this day, I'd come to stay and have some family time with my mom and nephews. I had decided that I'd stop the night at my sister's, as it was late. I was just going to sleep on the sofa, so I didn't wake my mom up. It was around 9:30 p.m. Everyone else had gone to bed. I was going to watch some TV and go to sleep, I was sitting downstairs on my own, watching the television, when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned my head slowly to see a big, dark shadow walking towards me. For a good 20 minutes, I was frozen to that spot. The closer this steadily moving thing got, the more detail I could see. It was 7, maybe 8 feet tall, completely black in color, and it looked like it was wearing a long coat with a wide-brimmed hat. By that point, it had made it to the dining room door, which was right next to the living room where I was. Eventually, I could move, so I turned everything off and ran like my life was in danger. I ran up the stairs, jumping over my mom and hiding under the blanket. Not long after this encounter, unfortunately, my mother died. I've been told by many people that it was the Hat Man that I saw. Some people have said that he is death coming to collect, while others have told me that it was a bad omen. After that day, I've never seen him again. I'm very spiritual and still come across ghosts. They don't bother me, but the encounter with the Hat Man has stuck with me all these years, to the point I'd never stay downstairs on my own if I stopped at my sister's. This happened when I was in my 20s. I'm 41 now, and I still won't stay alone at night. I have to be in bed before anyone else. Has anyone listening ever had a run-in with the Hat Man? Does anyone know what it means when he shows himself to you? Any responses are greatly appreciated. Pray to the Butterflies. From Needle. When I was younger, I remember my grandparents having a room filled with metal fake butterflies. Whenever I stayed over at their house, the butterfly room was where I slept. Though it was strange how each time I stayed over, my grandmother always told me to pray to the butterflies and to never remove them from the wall. I never really questioned it when I was little. One summer I was spending at my grandparents' house. I spent the whole day one day playing in their pond until dark. I was called inside, ate some dinner, took a bath, and went to bed. I was too tired to do my nightly routine of brushing my teeth and saying my prayers, so instead I just plopped onto my bed and fell asleep, exhausted. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I realized I could not move. I was terrified. I tried to sit up. I tried to call for help, but I just couldn't move or say anything. I lay there for a good minute until I began to hear scratching on the wall. I was able to move my eyes and I looked up. I saw then the butterflies moving their metal wings. I watched as my nightlight's light danced off the butterflies' wings, creating these rainbows. I watched them fly around my room until I ended up falling asleep and only woke up when the sun shone on my face. I sat up and looked around the room. The butterflies were sat in their normal spots. I came out of the room and told my grandmother. All she said to me was, "You must not have prayed, dear. Remember, always pray." We never really talked about it as I grew up. I never really prayed specifically to the fake butterflies either, and I haven't had an experience like that again. But it still was burned into my mind to this day. Oklahoma Crawler. From Country Guy 2391. I was a teenager when I saw it. I was home alone, and I thought I heard someone outside. We lived out in the country on 10 acres of land. When I peeked out the front door, I saw something looking over my dad's boat. The boat was on a trailer, and it was a decent-sized boat. It probably stood a foot over it. Its hands were on the side of the boat. It had long fingers, and the thing itself was whitish or grayish. I I remember it had spiderweb veins on its head and chest. It was skinny. I couldn't stop looking at it until it began to come around the boat, walking towards the house. It was probably 50 yards away from me. I panicked and went into the house. I went and grabbed my dad's pistol. I put a loaded clip into it and turned off the safety. When I opened up the door, it was about 30 yards away. I fired off 4 rounds. 2 I believe missed, and 2 either hit it or got very close. The thing took off. I ran back inside, locking the door and going into my bedroom. I slept with my dad's gun with me the rest of the night. When I woke up in the morning, I went to check for prints or any sign of that thing, but there was no trace. Those woods out there were always creepy. Even during the day, it felt like something or someone was always watching. A lot of creepy things happen out there, but that had to be the creepiest of them all. Maybe it's the property. Maybe it's a hotspot for paranormal things or cryptids. I'll never know for sure. I don't think I'm gonna miss living out there. The Homeless Man, from Jimbo Frogger 213. Sometimes the scariest of unexplained things are people with dark and hidden intentions. This happened roughly last year. I'd gotten my first home in Toronto because I'd recently gotten a job as a chiropractor. The house I was renting wasn't a very nice or big house, but it was still able to house me before I could afford something better. One day when I'd gotten off the city bus and started to walk home from my job after finishing my shift, I made eye contact with a homeless-looking man on the side of the road. He tried to ask me for some money, but I quickly walked away, not wanting to speak to this man. I got home and started putting away my things. As I was washing my dirty dishes, I looked out of my kitchen window to see the same homeless man sitting on my front porch. While I stared on in horror, the man looked back at me. I immediately shut my blinds and tried to think of a way to get rid of this guy. The sound of knocking disrupted my thought process. The first thing that came to mind was to go and check that I'd locked my front door properly, because I had a habit of leaving it unlocked. You see, while growing up, I'd lived in a rather safe neighborhood. The knocking continued all throughout the rest of the night. I thought it would never stop, but eventually, it did die down. The morning after, I went to go and check outside, but to my relief, he was no longer there. I went back inside and started my daily routine of having a shower and making a cup of coffee. Then I was off to work, grabbing my stuff and walking out the door. At that moment, it felt like I'd forgotten to do something, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I realized that if I kept walking slowly, trying to think about what I'd forgotten, I would miss the city bus and be late to work. Once I got home again, I felt an eerie feeling. Something wasn't quite right. As I walked up my front porch, I noticed my screen door had been slightly opened. I panicked, trying to remember if I'd locked my door before leaving my home. I opened my front door and realized it had been unlocked. I felt a chill go down my spine. I looked around my house with caution, trying to figure out if something had been stolen or if someone had entered my home. I searched, but no one was to be seen, and all my possessions were left as they were that very morning. It was as silent as a mouse, so I figured whoever it was no longer there. I put away my things before walking to my room. As I was putting on my pajamas, I felt like something was wrong, again, but I was too lazy to go and figure it out. As I started to write in my journal, I heard the sound of my refrigerator buzzing. It meant somebody had opened it. The fridge had been pretty old, so when you opened the door, it would make an unpleasant buzzing sound. To back up my thoughts of someone being in my home, I heard footsteps and they sounded like they were heading to the basement door, which was right next to my room. My mind immediately went back to last night and this morning. The homeless man, me forgetting something, the screen door being opened. It was all connected. This man was in my home, and there was no way a 160-pound woman like me would be able to defend myself against a man whose weight and height were unknown to me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, telling them about my situation. The operator told me that the police would arrive in about 20 minutes, so I would have to stay put for the time being. I had nothing with which to defend myself, and no idea what this homeless man was planning to do next. The operator heard how scared I sounded and suggested leaving the house or looking for an object to defend myself while in my room. I was too scared to leave my room, so I began to look for something that could be used for a weapon. I found a pair of scissors in my nightstand. I finally felt a bit safer, knowing that I had at least something. I began to hear the footsteps of the man coming up to the main floor. After reaching the main floor, I saw his feet stop under my door. He must have known I was in the house, and probably knew I'd called the cops. He knocked on my door, and even asked if I had. He then said that everything was going to be okay if I would simply tell the operator that everything was fine. I didn't respond because I was too scared to speak. The operator foolishly spoke again, telling me the cops were almost there. The man heard the operator and began wailing and banging on my door. Just in time, the police arrived and barged in. They yelled at the man. I could hear chaos that started from outside my door. The man was detained and arrested that day. After that experience, I made an alarm on my phone to tell me to lock my door every day. I never did find out his intentions. What is that? From Jay. This story happened in my backyard around 11 p.m. one night. I was camping with some friends of mine. I'll refer to them as O, M, and E. We were kicking off the summer by camping in the backyard. The girls were camping in the tent next to us, but they were up talking. The other guys had fallen asleep. I stayed up, doom-scrolling Instagram, and that's when I heard a bang outside of our tent. It was just near our big shed on the other side of the house. At the time, we lived in a neighborhood, so I wasn't really expecting what I saw. After the bang, another came, and another, until there were bangs happening every second. All of us were awake by then. O was asking and half yelling, "What the?" But I shut him up. I think it was too late, though, because the banging immediately stopped. We then began to hear footsteps heading towards the girls' tent. I panicked. A scream came from the girls' tent, and a horrible shriek came from this dark, tall figure next to the girls' tent, followed by a tearing sound. I grabbed my airsoft gun, which we had in the tent with us. I unzipped the flap and fired at it. I saw that figure turn right towards me. It was tall, with these small, bright white pupils. I watched as it appeared to float away, back towards the shed. After that, we slept inside. Apparently, I was the only one that got a good look at the thing. We moved out of that house about 3 years later, but after that night, I would occasionally hear that thing outside. So, I'm happy we moved. The Evil Light. From Shoelocks. I don't want to give too many details, because I no longer know who to trust and who to avoid speaking to. I'll say that my name is Nora, and at the time of what I'm going to tell, I had just turned 18. Back then, I lived in a small town in northeastern Argentina. One of those places where the few houses get lost in the fields and are barely visible from the roads. It's where everyone knows everyone, and they know every aspect of their neighbors' lives. It's a town where few leave, but I'm grateful to belong to that group. In the countryside, there are myths and legends aplenty, which vary as you travel through different towns. Those that compel you to follow certain traditions or avoid certain actions, or else an evil being will visit you. Of course, many people, especially the older folks, believed in these stories. But when I was little, I couldn't help but see all the legends for what they were, just stories. It was common for us to gather for dinner with the whole family, which was largely thanks to my many uncles and cousins. The family would eat barbecue and drink beer, and then there would be guitar strumming. My grandfather, a payador in his spare time, would tell us stories of those encounters to the rhythm of the strings, and I did nothing but clap or follow the lyrics with excitement. No gnome scared me. I knew I wouldn't encounter some monster in the shape of a hairy animal, and I even learned to see with total normality the remains of dark rituals on the sides of the roads, arts that were not viewed so badly by locals. I observed all this more as a curiosity rather than something evil, and I even enjoyed thinking that I might have a paranormal encounter one day. God, how foolish I was. One of all those legends was known throughout the country. The evil light, they call it. According to the story, it happens when someone dies in the countryside, and their poor soul does not receive a proper Christian burial, destined to wander in sorrow and ask for help from humans. It wasn't a nice request, of course, as it was said that the evil light could make livestock, and even humans, disappear. It was a legend that required some fear, or at least some respect, for the rest of the dead. That was why the whole town was on alert when one of the 5,000 souls living there suddenly disappeared. Sometimes when I hear a scream in the street, I still tremble remembering the chants of Pedro throughout the place. I don't remember his last name, but I do remember he was one of the town's shopkeepers. A good man, whose addiction to liquor and gambling led to bankruptcy. A somewhat foretold disappearance, perhaps, but no less mysterious for that. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to the fact that the police had strictly forbid us from wandering the fields until the investigation was resolved and Pedro's body was found. Not to spoil the forensic analysis, was what they claimed, and we complied. No town resident would go near. Let's camp out in the open our last night together. Let's see if that evil light really exists. It might seem that phrase was said by a tourist, given what I've told you so far. But no, it was uttered by Laura, my best friend, always a step braver and more daring than I was. I remember when she proposed it on the school stairs, the same usual group listening to her. Juan, David, Valentina, her, and myself. We'd finished school, and little by little, we would all start moving to bigger cities to seek better opportunities than being a farmer or a rancher. There were no arguments against it, as I recall, not even mine, as interfering with the investigation was a remote idea, and as I said, I wasn't scared of those legends. The time would be that same Friday, midnight. In a small town at that hour, everybody is sleeping, recharging their energy before the roosters crow at dawn. I packed up water and a flashlight, put on comfortable clothes, and left my room with the backpack on my shoulders. I was about to exit the house. Wait, I thought, as I touched the door handle. I looked back and went back to my room. I headed straight to my bedside table, and from one of the drawers I took out a small wooden box. Sliding the lid open, I noticed what I was looking for. A rectangular amulet, half a meter tall, with Christian crosses and other indecipherable symbols engraved into it. I took it with me. As I lifted it, I saw underneath the note my grandfather had left me when he entrusted it to me, months before passing away. May this amulet always accompany you. If you feel in danger, hold it tight. You will need it. My mind processed the words again. When my grandfather played the guitar, there it was. He would place it on the table or pin it near his chest before reciting his verses about the legends. Could it be that... Nonsense. I wasn't afraid of anything. But well, it was better to be safe than sorry. So I pinned the amulet to my shirt and headed to the meeting point. The summer night felt warm on my skin. The insects bounced between us like raindrops, and the excitement was palpable. The 5 of us ventured into the fields, and after a while of walking, we decided to set up camp. We made a small fire, and the warmth prompted us to start drinking the beers David had brought. Don't give me that look. It was common in the area, and I think it was that which made us sleep deeply while watching the beautiful starry night sky. Look! Suddenly, Laura's voice woke me up from my sleep, as well as the rest of the group. We left our positions to find her astonished. Her eyes looked as if they were about to pop from their sockets. It was like she had seen a ghost. I turned my head to where she was focusing her gaze. She was facing the rural horizon. It wasn't a ghost. It was a light. A light that indeed looked like a ghost, far, far away. Idiot, that's definitely a truck, Juan protested. And he was right. It was a very faint glow, barely perceptible, typical of the trucks that passed by the road to the south. I remember the 3 boys laughing at her, and she started to blush with embarrassment as she tried to defend herself. I'm not sure why, but I didn't laugh. I only recall a chill running down my spine right into my arms. I tried to hold her gaze, but my instincts told me otherwise. It's already 5. We have to go back, or they'll catch us. It took me a few seconds to process that sentence. It was my friend's laughter that finally pulled me away from that glow, making me look back, horrified to see that they'd already taken their backpacks and ran off. Hey, wait! I called. I grabbed my things, leaving behind only the embers of the fire, and pursued my friends among the trees. I took one last look back. I don't know if it was my imagination, but that glow seemed bigger. Come on! They shouted ahead of me. I tried to follow them clumsily, but I was the least physically fit of the 5 of us. In the summer, roosters detected the sun around 5:30, but the landscape was still shrouded in complete darkness. That's why it was hard for me to move through the vegetation, having bumped into obstacles several times already. My only guide was their voices. Sometimes they were close, other times distant. I asked them loudly to wait several times, but if they managed to hear me, it didn't show. Guys? I called again, before my foot hit a heavy branch on the ground, knocking me down. I quickly shook off the mud and stood up. My knees were somewhat sore, but the voices were now more distant. But still, I could see that light through the trees. It's not real, Laura, I told myself. But it seemed very real. My grandfather's nighttime guitar playing came back to my mind. But now what he recounted was not something to laugh at with cousins. Each pluck of his strings sent a shiver through the rest of my body, and I still don't understand how I didn't drop dead right there. I kept running, now almost blind, not even knowing where I'd last heard their voices. But if they were running from the glow, I simply had to go in the opposite direction. I dodged trees, bushes, weeds with the speed the situation forced me to have. "Guys, please," I cried. My screams no longer got an answer, but I kept trying to find one. I ran, and the glow seemed closer. I ran, and it got brighter. I was not making any distance. Then I bumped into another branch. This time, I rolled down the uneven terrain until I fell several meters down a hill. I was caught on a tree, firmly stopping me. I groaned, but I had no time to pay attention to the pain. I tried to sit up as best I could, taking out my flashlight. The forest had become completely dark. There were no traces of light anywhere. Maybe I was just paranoid, but maybe. "Don't do it, please." I jumped from my spot, my heart in my throat and every nerve on edge from that whisper that sounded like it came from a suffering child. I fell a few meters. I looked at what was behind me, and there it was. I must have screamed too much, although I don't know for how long, probably long enough for my friends, along with the police, to find me. I have fuzzy memories of what happened in the following hours. They rescued me. My parents hugged me a lot. They cried. And somehow, I found out in that very place, they'd found Pedro's body. Surely that was what had made me panic, along with my friends leaving me behind. Not in evil light that, according to the police, didn't even exist. Police who oddly wore the same amulets my grandfather had left me. My grandfather himself, who had been a police officer. Soon after, I moved to Buenos Aires to study. I felt an inexplicable peace by moving away from that place, which I could never see the same way again. My own home felt different, and my confusion was greater when I had the amulet examined by a priest. He seemed terrified of it, even bathed it in holy water and prayed for about an hour. He never wanted to tell me what he found inside. And I never went back, nor do I plan to. Not even for David's funeral, the only one who had stayed there to take care of the livestock. He died in the middle of the field and was not discovered for months. It was a situation similar to Pedro's. Although my friend had no debts, he felt he was constantly being watched by someone. He was the one who wanted to ask for help and didn't make it. To this day, I don't know for sure what happened, although I could imagine. I only know that the cold wind and distant lights sometimes remind me of a phrase. If I go back, I'd probably be next. Boots. From Frederica. It's been years since this incident. I was home alone with my sister and her dog at the time, a beautiful Rhodesian Ridgeback named Josie. We had different experiences in the home we lived in since we were kids, but the one I'm about to speak of takes the cake. My older sister, her baby boy, the dog, and I were home alone, staying up late as her husband was away training for work. We had a full day of going to Reno to run errands, and therefore spent the evening relaxing. Now, this home had the upstairs and the garage downstairs where I lived in the dorm room. In the garage, there was a doorway to the under part of the house, but on the other side was my dorm with my own personal door, which never worked. I would therefore either have to go upstairs and out the front door or disrupt my sister and her little family by going through the garage door. The staircase was an all-metal spiral staircase with triangle wedge-like steps and would creak noticeably whenever anyone would walk up or down. The door to the staircase had a lock on it as well, for safety reasons, as her son was a little curious baby boy, very adventurous. We had come home and settled in for the night, spending time together with her husband away for the week. I was sitting on the couch with Josie on the other side, snoring, and my sister was in the armchair beside the fireplace. I believe her little one was still up, which is why we were up so late, wanting to watch a show that he couldn't be up for. We were waiting for him to go down for bedtime. We had dinner, and finally, her little boy went down. However, when we'd gotten ourselves situated and ready for movie time, we both heard the staircase creak. At first, we looked at each other, thinking, it's just the house settling. What came next proved otherwise. We heard heavy-set footsteps climbing the stairs. Her husband wasn't due back until the end of the week. I shot off the couch like something gave me a strong electrical jolt and landed in my sister's lap, all the way from the arm of the couch. And Josie woke from her slumber, launching off the couch too, her back all ridges from her hackles being raised. My sis pushed me off and ran to go turn the deadbolt lock on the door. We were terrified, but knowing of different childhood experiences, we roughly brushed it off as an otherworldly visitor. Soon enough, things settled back down, but I opted to sleep upstairs by the fireplace, too scared to have anything to do with the downstairs. The next day, we went over to her neighbor's house, asking if he had come over at some point, or maybe if he'd seen anyone come over. That was a no for both. We racked our brains. Maybe it could have been a wild animal that got trapped in somehow. But we both knew what we'd heard. Heavy contractor steel-toed boots, much like her husband would wear for the line of work he was in. Going forward, nothing else happened, but her son, who was not awake for the event, began to say he saw a ghost. We didn't understand how he knew what ghosts were, as Catherine, my sister, was very vigilant about making sure he never knew or watched anything scary. The key was Josie, however. That dog knew something wasn't right and had flown into action, barking uproariously to protect us. Don't mess with Rhodesian Ridgeback dogs, ever. Going backward, however, I remember another event from when I was a child. We'd bought the home as a vacation home in Tahoe, so when we'd come up for Thanksgiving or Christmas, we'd arrive with all of our groceries and bags. I had 4 older sisters who were always messing around, pulling pranks on each other in one way or another to the point my dad would come downstairs to tell us to settle down or go outside. Since the dorm room was big, there was plenty of room for dancing and the occasional roughhousing. Horseplay, if you will. Happily, we would oblige. We got all bundled up in snow gear to go sledding down the hill right across the street. Being the youngster, I was left behind as I finished getting ready. Now, the home was old when we purchased it, with a giant crack in the garage floor foundation. My dad and I would repair that one summer. Anyway, I was left alone and hurried to get ready, because I didn't want to be alone very long, with the ghosts I felt living there with us. Upon thinking about this, I heard the door open back up, which startled me at first. But I figured maybe it was someone coming back in to get another toy, or Dad checking to see why it was suddenly so quiet. I happened to be wrong, though, as nobody was in the room, or even in the garage. Hastily, I grabbed my gloves and bolted outside. Someone, not a living someone, mind you, had just spooked me by opening the door. The door I know my sisters had firmly shut. The foundation was rugged, so sometimes the door would be jammed shut. One last experience I vaguely remember my parents talking about was again late one night on one of our visits to Tahoe. all of us girls decided to have a slumber party in the dorm room, albeit another rambunctious sleepover. We did stay up a little late to where, once again, Dad came back downstairs to tell us to quiet down. We apologized and began getting ready for bed. Later on, however, I overheard my mom inform my dad she thought we were all still up as she was hearing voices talking. A shiver ran down my spine as I heard her relay this experience to my dad, since we had all settled down after being hollered at. So to the ghosts of my childhood home, thank you for sharing your space with us rowdy kids. Disappearing Tree from Kisu. I want to share a few of my experiences with you. This is the first. In 1991, when I was 8 years old, living in a rural forest in Finland, it was time for our annual field trip with the whole school. As the area was more rural and in the middle of nowhere, we had only 9 students at the whole school, and I'm including myself in that. Because it would be needless to get a whole bus for a field trip for only 2 teachers and 9 students, parents and other adults were also welcomed to our field trip, albeit they paid to go. Our destination was the Olavinlinna Castle, over a 3-hour drive away in a town called Savonlinna. The castle was built in the mid-15th century, when Finland was still part of Sweden, to protect the nation against the neighboring country Russia. There were no inhabitants in the area, but the Swedish government forced Finnish people to move into the area to build the castle the royal crown wanted, and that's how Savonlinna came to be. Nowadays, it's also known for its annual opera festival, which is one of the biggest in Europe. I had never been further than 100 kilometers, or about 55 miles, away from home, so I was excited for the trip. The day was extremely sunny and nicely warm when we arrived at Olavinlinna Castle. The tour guide showed us around the castle, telling us the famous legend of Olavinlinna. I'll share it with you. Long, long ago, a young maiden lived in the castle. She fell in love with an enemy Russian soldier, and whenever they had a chance, they met in secrecy. One day, after this love affair had been going on for some time, the soldier asked if they could meet in secrecy in the darkness of the night inside the castle. The young woman agreed. When the night fell, she went to the main gate to let her lover inside. But this time, he wasn't alone. The entire Russian army was waiting there. The men stormed the castle, but their invasion was not successful, and they were driven away. This young woman, albeit completely innocent, was sentenced to be killed for treason. She begged for mercy, but that was in vain. She would be buried alive inside one of the castle's walls. Later, as a sign of her innocence, a rowan tree grew out of her heart and through the wall. This is a story tour guides tell to all the visitors, and it's also featured on Olavinlinna's official webpage. Of course, on our field trip, we heard the same story, while standing in the castle's inner circular yard. Next to me stood a couple I didn't know, and I heard them gasp, "Oh wow, look at that, it's so high." I turned to look at what they were staring at, with their craned necks, and I saw a rowan tree. It was growing from the castle's wall, just like in that legend. It was very green and lush, a vibrant-looking tree, growing around midway on the wall. It rattled my little kid brain. I kept staring at it intensely, thinking, how on earth can a tree grow from out of the wall? How did a seed even get in there? Where would it get its nutrients? All sorts of questions ran on in my head, because what I was seeing made no sense to me. Apparently, it also made no sense to this unknown couple on my right either, because they too were fixated on the tree. We all stared at it, this most lively, healthiest, luscious-looking little tree we've ever seen, for many, many minutes, until it was time to follow the tour guide to our next destination inside the castle. Fast forward, I'm 17 now. My best friend had applied to Savonlinna Art and Music High School and was accepted in, so her family moved there. It was the first summer break for her when I came to visit. We agreed that we should visit the medieval castle. I told my friend that I really wanted to see the rowan tree again. It was one of the best things I'd ever seen. When we made our way inside the castle, we noticed the tour group was about to start their journey with the guide. We figured we would head inside the castle first, before the group left, so that we weren't in their way and the group won't block our access to different areas of the castle either. Hurrying in, we made our way deeper into the castle, and trust me when I say we didn't leave any single nook or cranny unchecked. If it wasn't chained or marked with no trespassing or personnel only signs, we went in. We spent maybe an hour inside the castle, but we were unable to find the rowan tree. I wondered to my friend if the tree had fallen down, or maybe it had been cut down because of rotting, causing a safety hazard. I mean, the tree was growing around the middle of a very high castle wall. If it had fallen on someone's head, they'd be dead, or at least severely injured. We caught up with the tour guide at the top of one of the castle towers. The tour guide was telling her visitors the story of the maiden and the rowan tree, so my best friend and I decided to eavesdrop on the story. We pretended to be watching the scenery stretching over the lake surrounding the castle, when in reality, we kept concentrating on the tour guide's voice. The tour guide said that there had indeed been a rowan tree, which had grown out from the castle's wall. But unfortunately, it had come down in an extremely bad storm in the 1950s. Shocked, I turned to look at my friend and gasped to her under my breath so that no one else could hear me. That can't be true. I saw the tree in the 90s. What does she mean it fell down in the 50s? I was sure that the castle staff had messed up with the tree. Maybe they'd accidentally killed it. Then they had to come up with some ridiculous story of a storm. However, when I later searched for more information of the rowan tree and the castle, the tour guide had spoken the truth. The tree had indeed come down in the mid-50s in a very heavy storm, which had ripped the poor tree from the wall. The castle's webpage also confirmed this information. Not only that, but I also found the only surviving photo of the said rowan tree. It had been taken 2 years prior to its demise. It was nothing like the one I'd seen in 1991 with that unknown couple. The tree we had seen was lush and vibrant, round and bushy, whereas the tree in the photo was just a few wimpy sticks coming out of the wall. Besides, it was in the wrong place, growing out from the edge of the castle's roof, whereas the tree we'd seen was on a castle's wall. I went on to search for more information of any other known trees which may have grown in the castle, but there was none. Only this wimpy, sad excuse of a rowan, which itself was such a rare phenomenon that it still lives in the castle's legends. If the castle staff was so excited for a few sticks, they wouldn't have missed a grown tree, albeit a tiny one, sticking out from a wall in such a visible spot. I know for certain that it wasn't a prop either. It was a living tree. Trust me, growing up in a rural area gives you an ability to differentiate a real tree from a fake one. Also, I need to say that we have only a few castles in Finland, and the closest castle to Olavinlinna is Hämeenlinna Castle, over 300 kilometers away. So I have not visited any other castles in Finland. Not before, nor after. It's been decades since that incident, and I still don't know what it was. Was it a ghost tree? A glitch in a matrix we all saw, to which the tour guide didn't react for whatever reason? Or have I, without knowing, jumped timelines to a different reality where the rowan tree of Olavinlinna Castle was just a wimpy little thing, jerked down from its roots in a storm in the 1950s? The movie's message from Pumpkin Mama 2022. My story begins when I was in high school. I won't be using the actual names of people or locations in the story for privacy reasons. I was homeschooled off and on my whole childhood, but my story begins when I was entering the 10th grade. My folks were planning on enrolling me in a private school in our area, and to be honest, I hated the idea of it right from the word go. But my mind didn't begin sending me urgent red flag signals until the day I visited the school, a week or so before I was to start. First of all, as soon as I saw the building, I remembered it was the same school I'd visited years back, when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and I'd felt so unsafe and uneasy there that I'd refused to stay even that one full day. I had to be picked up at lunch. So naturally, the place already came with bad vibes attached. I walked through the front doors and every cell in my body seemed to be screaming no, no, no. One of the staff showed us around and the whole place creeped me out for some reason that I couldn't really place. It just felt wrong. But how the classrooms and lunchroom made me feel was nothing compared to the deep, overpowering wave of dread I felt upon entering the gym. It wasn't like the room itself looked creepy or unsettling. In fact, I remember plastering on a fake smile and complimenting the principal on how beautiful the gym was, which wasn't a lie. It was a nice gym as far as looks went, but something about it made me feel so uncomfortable. So we saw the rest of the school, met some teachers and a few future classmates, and we left. No sooner had I gotten in the car, I said to my parents that I did not like it. I did not want to go there. Unfortunately for me, though, they weren't feeling what I was feeling, and were set on it. Fast forward a couple of weeks. Time for my first day. Words can't even describe the fear I felt that morning. I felt so out of place, like I wasn't supposed to be there. But as one does, I pushed on. Now, the handful of stories I will tell next happened sporadically throughout the 2 years I spent there. The first thing that comes to mind was all the papers I had to sign in order to be accepted. It went beyond the typical things, such as emergency contacts and previous grade averages. No, it slipped into more personal territory. Like, do you promise never to speak badly about the school, even outside school hours? And you must uphold the school image, even if no longer a student here. Yeah, that was strange. Wouldn't it be strange to you? I've always felt that if you have nothing to hide, you don't care what folks say about you. The strict dress code was odd too. I understand modesty, but myself and the other girls were scolded and written up for the most minute of things. Things like being told our skirts were too short. They were required to come to the middle of our knees, when really, they were plenty long enough. We weren't allowed to have any holes in the backs or sides of our shirts, no matter how small. And girls were not allowed to wear pants under any circumstances. Anything and everything was labeled as satanic, too. Some of the most ridiculous examples that I can recall include country music, snakes, most films, dancing, and more. To say it was very cult-like is an understatement. Any incidents that occurred at the school were kept very quiet. I can remember asking classmates about things that had happened on which I was foggy on the details, only for them to say they did not know if they were allowed to say anything about it. Students were also strictly prohibited from speaking about the teachers amongst each other, as these conversations, negative or not, were almost always shot down by some teacher there. So I'm hoping now that you understand the environment, we can move on to the creepy stuff. Almost all this happened in that darned gym. I hated that room with a passion, and my time there left me with many more questions than answers. First of all, the year I arrived, the gym teacher was new. She was nice enough, sure, but whenever I asked her, or anyone, how she ended up with the job, or why the old teacher had left, they would clam up and change the subject. I also remember that on one occasion, some of my classmates were reprimanded for scooting chairs across the gym floor, because it was newly replaced. Just trying to make conversation as the shy person I was, I turned to our teacher and asked, "Oh, cool. It looks pretty nice. When did they replace it?" And once again, the response I received was a nervous look and a quick change of subject. That was certainly weird, but I tried not to dwell on it. During my first year, I had gym class every other day, and as it is with most schools, we were required to change clothes before class. The changing rooms may very well have messed with me even more than the gym itself. I always had the overpowering urge to get in and get out as fast as I could, because I hated being in there. I always changed in a shower stall, and I remember noticing at some point that the shower heads were removed, as were the handles with which to turn on the water, and a wad of duct tape covered what was left of the spigot. It looked like the showers had been purposely rendered unusable. I thought about that a lot, but based on past experiences, I decided not to ask any questions. It would likely be a waste of time anyway. Several students left the school with no warning throughout my time there. No one wanted to say anything about it. Teachers answered questions vaguely and didn't allow many questions to be asked. The aura of misery was so strong in that building. When in a group, all the students seemed happy. But as soon as you were one-on-one with someone, they would tell you how much they hated it there. More than once, I overheard murmurings of, "This place is so haunted," or "This school is cursed." Things of that nature. I can't say I didn't believe it though, as a few months in, along with all the previously mentioned weirdness, I would sometimes see someone around the hallway corner right in front of me, and seconds later, as I rounded the corner myself, they were gone. I once could have sworn I heard screaming coming from the gym as I walked by the double doors. Assuming it was the kindergarten class, I peered through the little window to see if I could say hello to a little girl I'd befriended in that class. But the gym was empty. This happened a couple of times. Once when I was walking outside to take the day's trash out, and I passed by one of the always open gym doors, and I swear once more I heard screaming, yelling, talking. As I turned to walk back, the noises stopped, and the gym turned out to be empty. The little kindergartners that I looked after during their nap time, some days, often claimed to be scared of the lady, sometimes also called the shadow, and other terms like that. They always claimed to see it, or maybe her, walking by the door in the hallway, and every time I would go check, just to ease their little minds, no one would be there. Needless to say, the toxic environment about the place, combined with the paranormal heaviness of the atmosphere, did a number on my mental health, and I began to have nightmares and weird dreams. I had this reoccurring dream where the school was burning and I was trapped inside, and others that had a common theme of being trapped inside the school too. It got so bad that eventually, every time I passed an open door, a voice was pleading with me to run, to escape, to get out, to make a run for it. But anxiety kept me from acting on it. At some point, I even contemplated deliberately getting myself expelled just to escape the awful place. But of course, I just didn't have the guts. As spring began to bloom, and I prepared for the school's banquet, not a prom, they always made such a big deal of the fact it was a banquet and not a prom, I found myself scrolling through free movies on my phone. I ran across the film Carrie, and as a new horror fan, I decided why not. Folks, believe me when I tell you I have never been so scared in my life. If you've seen the movie, I'm sure you're now realizing the coincidental happenings at my school. My parents knew about all these oddities, and I seriously considered making them watch that movie right then and right there to prove my point. But I didn't. I figured they would call me crazy. I mean, it's a fictional film after all, right? Of course it's only a movie, I convinced myself. But still, I felt the need to look into it more. Have you ever felt like you were being sent a message? Like God or the universe was just trying to tell you something through some means? Well, that's how I felt, so I had to look into it. 2 days later, it was banquet time, and there I was, all decked out and scared out of my mind, but not saying a word. The banquet was held in the school's lunchroom, which was quite crowded. The gym would have been a better choice, for sure. Thinking back on Carrie, I decided to perform a little experiment. I walked over to one of my teachers, made some small talk, then asked, "Hey, why don't we do the banquet in the gym? Seems like it would be easier there." My teacher gave me an odd look and answered, "We used to, but..." Then she stopped, before abruptly changing the subject. All right, that's Exhibit A, I thought. I continued to mingle, and honestly, I had a decent time, not taking my severe anxiety into account, of course. After having a bite to eat, I made my move, asking the people at my table, "So, are we planning to elect a prom queen anytime soon?" I mean it when I say to you the whole room went silent for a second. It was like time itself had stopped for a moment, followed by a collective chorus of no's and absolutely not. That was it. That sold it for me. The very moment the event was over, I booked it, not even bothering to attend the after party with my date. I went home, and my parents could see how shaken up I was. They took me seriously this time, finally. I'm not kidding when I tell you that I ran out those front doors and never came back. A rash decision, maybe. An odd but harmless series of coincidences, possibly. But I have learned in my life to never ever doubt your own gut feeling, especially when the signs were so loud and clear that something was wrong. And I'm so glad I did, because by fall the next year, the school was shut down with no explanation, no word from anyone, no news coverage, and it was never spoken of again in our little town. Nobody ever knew exactly what happened, not that I know of, but for a school that had been there for over 50 years to just shut down that way, I felt fortunate that whatever it was, I'd been there to see it. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Sprout myth number 2. Eating organic is expensive.
Not when you've got surprisingly great prices on delicious organic finds.